Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to take back to 1914, where Europe is at war. On one side, we have the Central Powers, Germany, Austro-Hungary, and the Ottomans, facing off against Britain, France and their empires, Italy and Japan. 4 years later, around 20 million casualties, peace reigns. The Central Powers, Germany and Austro-Hungary, are defeated. And in 1919, that peace is cemented with the Treaty of Versailles. Now, this was purportedly negotiated, but the Germans were not invited to these negotiations. They were forced upon them. The Allies decided everything that was going to happen. Now, the what do they say here? The Germans were meant to accept responsibility. It was their fault the war happened. Reparations, they were meant to pay for the damages committed. They were meant to cede territory to their former enemies. They had to limit their military, and they were allowed no armoured vehicles. And there's some boring stuff with the League of Nations that we won't go into. Now, all of this planted the seed for, in the 1930s, the rise of Nazism and eventually World War II, which, if World War I didn't sweep away the old world, World War II certainly did. Now, I also contend that alongside of this, and slightly inadvertently and circuitously, it also planted the seed for a group of slightly overweight software developers to get together in a ski resort in Utah in 2001 to talk about software development and how it really wasn't working. The traditional waterfall methods that they were using was delivering software late, over budget, and not really to user specifications. They thought there was a better way to do things. And so they came up with what we call the Agile Manifesto, which you may have heard of. Now, can I remember the key tenets of the Agile Manifesto? People interactions over processes and tools, working software over extensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and reacting to change over following a plan. Did I get it right? I've still got it, people. I've still got it. If you want to impress people in Vodka Revs on Friday, learn this and tell it to them. You'll be an absolute legend. So you might be wondering, why am I talking to you about this? Who the hell am I, and what do I want to talk to you about? Well, if we think back before winter fuel payments, before the Ukraine war, before COVID, what happened before that? Brexit, Donald Trump, 2008, there was a thing called the financial crash, which was just about when I was leaving university. And for somebody with an archaeology degree, it was not a great time to be on the job market. But there were two wars running, Afghanistan and Iraq. And so lots of people like me followed the sound of drums and joined up. So I went to the military academy in 2010, and then went to Afghanistan in 2013. Gosh, it's actually a bad slide. You don't really see three of me, do you? But here we are. Gosh, I've aged badly. So that's me in Afghanistan 2013, eating a pizza, which is sort of a little bit of a view into my future. And I spoke to a medic out there, and he told me that we experienced a lot of traumatic injuries. And he said that actually, because there were so many of these things, they had so much experience of treating them, that the techniques and methods that they developed were already saving lives back in the civilian world for things like car crashes. And I thought it was interesting that sort of military conflict can be a crucible for things and really accelerate the development of certain subjects. And it got me interested in this. And I thought, well, where else might this be relevant? It took a few years, but a couple of years later, I started working at what was then a very little-known startup called Deliveroo. I went from a steely-eyed dealer of death and destruction to a sort of drowned rat delivering lukewarm, upside-down pizzas. But it was brilliant, so I went into product management, which was then a slightly unknown trade. I didn't really know what it was. And I started working in sort of agile development teams. And I was very intimidated by this at first, but as soon as I got into it, I thought, oh, this is just basically like what I was doing in the army. And that got me thinking, like, well, why is this? Where did this all come from? And so I started tracing it all back. And I think I ended up at the Treaty of Versailles as to where it all began. That's the view from my bedroom. So let's go back to the 1930s then, and we'll look at Blitzkrieg, which is, I think, the birth of Agile. So if we remember that when we looked at the terms of the treaty, there was a lot of stuff about economics, which led to the rise of the Nazi Party and then to the war. But there's also the military piece there. Germany had to limit its size of the army and couldn't have any armoured vehicles. Now, in the 1930s, I think the world started to know that another war was on the cards. And so German generals were starting to think, how can we win this coming war without having to go through the meat grinder of World War I again, but also with our very limited resources that we've got now. This chap here, General Heinz Guderian, was a brilliant military theorist, and he started to think about how can I use new technology to try and break that stalemate. And he saw there were two things which had come to be in the intervening years. One was radios, short-range radios, and the other was better tank technology. And so he developed a doctrine called Achtung Panzer. Achtung, watch out, Panzer, tank. Watch out, tanks. And he thought, I can use these technologies to do things better. Previously, armies had worked in a very ordered, hierarchical way, where someone at the top, Caesar Augustus, would give a diktat, and it would go all the way down the chain of command, and then people would plod along the battlefield very slowly and ponderously. He thought, actually, what we can do with these tanks and radios is say, all people on the ground need to do is know the commander's intent, and then we'll let them go, and we'll let them work together with these short-range radios, get in their tanks, and whiz off, and try and disrupt and dislocate the enemy, and then exploit gaps in the lines and win the victory. This was like very good in theory, but like, you know, all theories are nothing until they're tested. The apex of Blitzkrieg came in the summer of 1940, where after war had broken out, Germany invaded France. And France was the greatest army in the world, right? It won World War I, it had 1 million men in the field, and was seen to be undefeatable. Well, Germany, with Blitzkrieg tactics, defeated France in 18 days, which was, you know, I think in our modern tech world, we'd call it disruption, right? That they'd use these quick-moving, new modern techniques to do something which was completely unthought of and unheard of. Now, these techniques are not the only thing that go into winning a war or running a tech company, but they are some of it. And of course, as we know, over the coming years, Germany was ground down by other means. But even in sort of 1944, 1945, when Germany was really a spent force, local commanders were able to win incredible battles against all the odds because they were still using these sort of blitzkrieg techniques. So after the war, the Western allies, who are going to go on to become NATO, who are the current alliance that we in Britain sit in, they captured a lot of these generals, including Heinz Guderian, and they sort of asked him, like, how on earth did you do this? What were you doing? We want to learn from you. And they told them their techniques. They said, you know, we moved away from this hierarchical, top-down way of doing things. We empowered our people by giving them our intent. We told them exactly what we wanted them to do. We built what they called Kampfgruppen, which is a battle group, where they put all the different trades that are needed together so that they could work together on problems. They didn't have to say, who's in charge of logistics? Call up so-and-so and get him to do it. And of course, he's off on holiday or doing something else, and it takes, you know, when you have to go up in your company to get something approved, it takes bloody months. Well, you didn't have to do that. You're all there organically working together on things. They were quick moving. They trusted people. And so NATO over time have put that into their own doctrine, and it's what today is called mission command, and it's what I was used to working in when I was in the army and out in Afghanistan. You know, that very quick thinking, collaborative, intent-based leadership. Now the Americans soon after that they took this to new extremes. And sort of like deep psychological levels, when in sort of the 1950s they were thinking about how does one win an aerial battle between two aircraft, and they came up with this thing called the OODA loop. They had this idea that if you're fighting in the aircraft, then whoever can make the most decisions in the fastest period of time would win the fight, because what you need to do is observe the situation, understand what's going on, orientate yourself, understand how you fit into that situation, decide what you're going to do, and then do it. And then do that again and again and again and again and again and again. You know, if you can do that 3 times in the space that takes your opponent to do it once, then you can be on top of them, right? And they're going to be wiped out. So the OODA loop. And if we think about like our agile methodologies, it's kind of just these 2 things, mission command and OODA loop joined up. Small teams working together with a common goal in mind, understanding exactly what they've got to do, and then cycling round and round and round and round. planning, requirement analysis, design, building, testing, over and over and over. And that is the way that we can use these agile methodologies to disrupt companies. And you see that over and over and over, that small companies who can do this, they're disruptive. As you grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bloated, suddenly people at top want to have their jobs doing something, and so then they start doing that centralized command and control, and the whole thing starts to fall over. I would say any of you who are looking to become UX Jedis or moving into Agile, if a lot of these places do say they want Agile experience. When I moved into this, I was very intimidated by it. I thought, oh, Agile, it's got capital A. People sell you certificates from thousands of pounds. Must be difficult. If anyone does sell certificates on this stuff, I actually think they're quite good and definitely do the courses. But actually, it's not that hard. It's not that hard. You can all learn it in hours, days. There's some good books in it. Ask me about it afterwards if you want some advice on them. There's a couple of other things, a couple of tidbits that I want to give you, which I think also help us in the world of product management. That come directly from World War II. I call this product requirements. I wish I called this a tale of two tanks. Think it says a tale of two tanks there. Product requirements are so important when it comes to military vehicles. We spoke about old Heinz Guderian before, right? He wasn't allowed any tanks to practice with, so he used this, a tractor. What do you need a gun on your tank for to practice your maneuvers? Just use that, and suddenly you get around the treaty stipulations. But anyway, what I really want to talk to you about is two things. One, boats, two, tanks. So, 1941, Britain and bits of Greece stood alone against the Nazi might. Now, Britain was in grave danger of being starved out of the war by these things, U-boats or little submarines, who were sinking lots and lots of shipping in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, we probably came within a couple of months of being starved out, but luckily, there weren't enough of these things. Because Germany had spent the 1930s, instead of building these things, building this, the Bismarck, the bloody biggest battleship Europe had ever seen. Totally useless in the 1940s, right? Air power would mean that these things did nothing. It was wiped out in 1941. But it takes a colossal amount of steel. You could have built hundreds and hundreds of U-boats with this thing. But, this thing looks bloody good. And Adolf Hitler in particular was all about Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons, and prestige products. And so he had a lot of influence on this. And so rather than building something which lives under sea and nobody can ever see, it's much better to have one of those sailing around. Actually, bad idea. Build U-boats. On a sort of more micro level, I want to look at these two things here. The Tiger on my right, your left, and the Sherman on my left, your right. Tiger's German, the Sherman is American. Now, the Tiger is a fantastic piece of engineering. It was actually designed by Porsche, and not just like the company, actual Mr. Porsche designed this thing. But of course, hideously engineered, as anyone knows who works with engineers. Its requirements were have a big gun, have lots of armor. Okay, right, sounds kind of all right for a tank, but actually not good enough, really not good enough. Because it does have the biggest gun ever mounted on a tank and the thickest armor, it's also unbelievably heavy. And so you can see here, it's got 3 interlocking sets of road wheels in order to support it. And so in order to maintain suspension, you need to take all of these damn wheels off to get at it, which means that it's out of action for most of the time. You can just about see here the size of the tracks. That meant it was so wide that it didn't fit on any of the European railways. So it needed another set of tracks to go on the railways. So you couldn't really move it around. It was too wide to get down the roads in most French villages, so you couldn't really drive it around. So actually, it spent most of time out of action. But if you wanted to get its engine out, you needed to take the turret off. And you couldn't take the turret off in the field because it's too heavy. So you needed to get it back to a workshop, which you couldn't do because it can't drive anywhere or it can't go on a railway. So actually, if you saw one of these things in the field, it would really ruin your day. But chances are you were never going to see one because it was stuck back in Germany somewhere. So yeah, like nice sounding requirements, big gun, thick armor, but actually totally useless. The Sherman, on the other hand, was completely different. Their number one requirement was reliability and getting it onto the battlefield. My favorite product requirement ever in any sort of product is that this thing had a weight limit of 29 tons. And that's because the weight limit of the cranes that were on American docks could only take that. And they knew that this thing was going to fight overseas. So anything over 29 tons wasn't going to get to the battlefield. You can see here they're doing that same operation, trying to fix the suspension. They don't need to take any wheels off because they're on exposed bogies. It's a brilliant piece of design, and these things were far more effective than those Tigers. And that slightly leads on to my next point, which is more of an organizational piece. I've titled it "Steel, Not Flesh," because this was the Allies' overriding doctrine for fighting the war. What they really wanted to do was preserve life. And so in order to do that, they thought, we are going to put all of our efforts into producing tanks and armored vehicles and all sorts of things, rather than putting bodies on the front line to get killed. And you can see this here with the production numbers of the Sherman versus the Tiger. Sherman, about 50,000 of them were built, Tiger, 1,500. So you're even less likely to encounter one of those things. If we look at then it's quite difficult to visualize, but we think about the numbers of troops that we put into combat. Britain and America put about 15% of troops saw combat, whereas Japan, Germany, and Soviet Union about 25%, 10% more. If you look at casualty rates, you can start to see how all that played out. And I think when we think about product development, we can take some lessons here, right? I think it's very tempting to say, what we need is features. Features, features, features. And we put everybody in frontline product teams developing user-facing features. And what do? We kind of get in each other's way. We're all trying to build on those same surfaces. We're annoying each other. We're putting out too many MVPs which don't really work and then need loads of maintenance. And the whole thing starts to get bloated and a bit of a mess. Whereas actually perhaps what we should be doing is thinking about, should we put all of our people in the factories, producing Shermans, making sure that the code base is clean, making sure that our DevOps are good. Can we release one touch? Can we do all sorts of things? Can we do user testing quickly? All that stuff means that those people who actually are on the front line developing products can just do it quickly and easily and develop those like perfect products first time, rather than building a load of mess like we sometimes do, or I often do. So then I don't feel like I could be here without trying to give a little bit of a plug. Don't worry, I'm not selling anything and affiliated with nobody. Nobody wants to be affiliated with me. But I thought I would put up the international bat sign of veterans worldwide. And just say that, veterans do lack experience in certain industries, right? Someone coming fresh out of the forces is not going to have done very much, but they do have a lot of experience in other things and a lot of raw talents, particularly in things like Agile methodologies. So I implore you, if you do get the opportunity to hire a veteran, then do, or at least give them a cup of tea or a pint when you see them. That's all from me. Thank you so much for your time, people, and I look forward to having a beer with you.